Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of The App, which has nothing to do with computers. It stands for Architects, People, and Politics. Our special guest today, State Representative Julie Emerson from Carencro, correct?
That's right, Lafayette Parish, but I was born in Claiborne Parish, so
you were.
I got some good audience here.
And you got some family up here,
That's
too,
right? That's right. Still have plenty of family in Homer and in Shreveport now.
All right, fantastic. Well, we appreciate you being with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Julie is the chairwoman of the House Ways and Means Committee, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so that's where all the tax bills emanate from there.
That is correct.
And so you want to talk about Amendment 2, which has been the talk of the state, right?
It has been. Definitely a lot of conversation.
Clear it up a little for us. Let's just start with this. What does Amendment 2 do? And I know that in itself is quite an answer.
Yeah, sure. And I'm first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for having me in this format so we can talk a little bit more about what Amendment 2 does and clear up some misconceptions, hopefully.
Yeah.
Amendment 2, of course, is a rewrite of Article 7 of the state constitution. You'll probably remember when we were in the regular session last year, we had a lot of conversations about having a constitutional convention for the whole constitution. Kind of had some back and forth discussion with the Senate about how we were going to do it, when we were going to do it, who would be delegates. Didn't quite get that across the finish line. So as we got into the special session in November, we were dealing with tax reform. We decided to tackle Article 7, which is the article that deals with fiscal matters, taxation, revenue matters in the Constitution. And I'm sure you probably saw there was a lawsuit about it. So just to clear up, that did get dismissed. But
Supreme Court said it's cool, go ahead.
Exactly. And so the legislature does have the purview to rewrite an entire article in one constitutional amendment. And so that's what we did here. Certainly have had a lot of questions about, why did you put a teacher pay raise in here with standard deduction for seniors and, all of those things in it. And the reason is because they're all in Article 7. Jeff, our Constitution has been amended over 300 times since it was adopted in 1974. And over 80% of those 300 plus amendments dealt directly with Article 7. So it's kind of chock-a-block full of probably a lot of, it was a lot of outdated things that had already rolled off the books. So just kind of cleaning up some of that language and then really, moving things, what I would say, in their proper place. There was just a lot of things in there that should probably be reserved for the tax code and not necessarily the Constitution. I think the main question you always have to ask yourself is, what rises to the level of being in a state constitution versus in state statute? So that was really, what we faced with this. But there's a lot of really important aspects that we can dive deeper into. Sure. You've heard, obviously, about the teacher pay raise. Right. You've probably heard about raising the standard deduction for seniors. So those 65 and over will be able to keep more of their money tax-free. It helps phase out the inventory tax. We work with our local partners to try to phase out that what I consider to kind of be an unfair regressive tax on our small businesses.
Yeah, so that's really great for business, right?
Yeah. So a lot of really important things in there. There has been a little bit of controversy over some of the property tax exemptions, and really the main
like
point,
religious
right.
Property.
So yeah, I would love to get into that.
Sure.
Love to clear up all the misconceptions on that. We have a lot of property tax exemptions that are in our Constitution. A national organization that kind of does an analysis of state constitutions told us that we had by far the broadest language of any state for property tax exemptions that was in our Constitution. So we said, okay, let's kind of do a survey, look at what other states do and where they have some of these exemptions. So that's what we did. That's where that conversation started.
Yeah.
Obviously, we know the homestead exemption, incredibly important to every individual in Louisiana.
Yes.
Everyone enjoys it. So we kept that in the Constitution. And then came the conversation about our churches and religious organizations. We sat down with several church leaders. There was a representative from the Council of Bishops who was there with the Catholic Church. The Louisiana Baptist Association was there. Family Forum was there. We kind of all had a conversation about, we do believe absolutely in religious freedom and that churches deserve constitutional protection. And so that's why we came up and crafted the language that protected our churches and our church institutions in the Constitution.
I mean, there was a lot of a misconception that was going to go away, that it wasn't going to be preserved or protected, but not true.
Yeah, so, and I want to be very transparent about that because there's been a lot of questions, and so I want to be very clear. The language in the Constitution, it says houses of worship, it says housing for clergy, such as convents, monasteries, parsonages, educational institutions like seminaries for ministry training. So when we came up with that language, a house of worship, there's been a lot of misconception from people that think, well, that's only the sanctuary.
Yeah.
I do not believe that to be the case. The reason we use the word house of worship is because when we all got together with some of these church leaders, we decided, hey, look, that's the church campus. There's a lot of churches that maybe they have one building, maybe they have 4 buildings, but anything that's involved in the house of worship falls under that constitutional protection.
Good.
And I would tell you that probably 99% of our churches in Louisiana probably function under one building. We have a lot of smaller churches, but hey, we certainly still do have larger churches. They might have multiple campuses. And one thing that came up after the session was over, one thing that came up was some folks who were concerned about, what if I have a downtown ministry, like a food bank or something that is a part of the ministry of our church, but not necessarily on our church campus. Yeah. So I said, look, guys, obviously it's certainly not our intention to leave out any type of ministry whatsoever. I want to be clear, though, everything that is moved into statute is still there. So if you're currently enjoying a property tax exemption, you will still have it when this amendment passes. Okay. Nothing is going away whatsoever. We left that church language in the Constitution. We moved all of the other language into statute, which still has a 2/3 vote, supermajority protection of the legislature, gubernatorial signature or veto, either way. So nothing is going to be taxed if this amendment passes. There are no changes to that. It's just a matter of if it's in the Constitution or if it's in the tax code. But I have told many of the churches who were concerned about maybe some ancillary ministries they have in other places. We are already working on some language to insert back and broaden that constitutional language a little bit to make sure they feel very safe, very comfortable. And just from a personal standpoint, Jeff, grew up Southern Baptist, went to First Baptist Homer, Louisiana, then First Baptist Lafayette. I'm on the board of a Southern Baptist seminary. My mother's the principal of a K-12 school at our church. So I promise you I would not be invited to Thanksgiving lunch if I did anything to hurt churches in this state.
I'm just curious. I wonder how, since you've been over backwards to make sure that they get these protections. How do these rumors get started? Do you think that go ahead? I'm sorry.
Look, and I'll say this. I think that everyone who's had concerns and questions about this is well-meaning. I'm not upset about it. Sometimes it's frustrating that kind of rumors permeate because, frankly, concerns turned into people saying Amendment 2 taxes churches, and that just could not be further from the truth. There is no possible way that Amendment 2 is going to tax a church if it passes. Good. It's just not.
Good.
It's been frustrating, but I do understand the concerns about the future, maybe about some of these ancillary ministries that they didn't feel like were protected in that language that we put in. And that's why I told them, no problem if we still have some concerns. Obviously, I wish we could have addressed those concerns in the session when we were doing it. But I have no problem because my heart and my desire is to always protect the church. Religious freedoms obviously are incredibly important. And I do believe that, the property tax exemptions of the church and they're not being unduly burdened by the government is incredibly important. Yeah. So any mistakes we made on that, we will absolutely rectify. But like I said, I do feel like the language we put in there is very strong. I do not feel like anyone is in any danger whatsoever.
Well, the bill itself is 115 pages long.
Sure.
That gave people, I think, concern because the summary of it on the ballot was reduced to 91 words, and I think people got anxious about that or had a little anxiety about that. But the Supreme Court now, as you said, has ruled that, this is good. No, there's no pretense here. There's no subterfuge going on, and that can proceed and go ahead and be on the ballot. But that is difficult, right, to try and summarize one of these things.
It is, and I'll address the fact that the bill was quite lengthy, 115 pages, as you said. But you have to remember too, in a piece of legislation, when you're striking language and potentially moving it with a statutory companion maybe into the tax code, it makes it longer just because you have to represent language that may be struck out. So there's a lot of that in there as well. I do realize that major change is very difficult, and so I'm appreciative of the questions. I'm appreciative of the concerns. It's hard for me to say this because I realize I was the author of the bill and I seem biased, but there were a lot of people that sat down and a lot of work that went into this, and so I would certainly never claim that I was solely responsible, but I truly believe this is some of the greatest fiscal reform that Louisiana has seen, and certainly in 50 years. And I really do believe it's important. I know it's challenging. I know it's difficult.
Sure.
I'm glad we're sitting down in this format to talk through it more.
Absolutely.
To help people understand. But change is hard, and I've referenced this a lot. I laugh a little bit. The Senate President Cameron Henry has a quote in his office. Somebody made a plaque from a speech that he gave somewhere, and he said, everybody wants major changes. They just don't want anything to be different. And so, and I think about that a lot. Because it is. I mean, anytime you try to make a major change like this, it brings a lot of questions, and I understand that. I'm happy it brings a lot of questions, but we have to do big, bold things to move this state forward, because we've been at the bottom of everything for a very long time, and I want to change that.
Well, Article 7 itself, I just did a show with Richard Nelson, Revenue Secretary Richard Nelson, yesterday. And he was talking about Article 7 itself and all the amendment that you mentioned, all the changes to that. And it is now longer than the original Constitution itself. That's crazy. That needed to be changed, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, like we said, we really tried to take a very methodical approach to this. I do want to kind of segue into the teacher pay raise, because I really want to address that aspect, because what we're doing there speaks to a greater fiscal reform, I think, than even people may realize, because I've had a lot of questions of, why did you throw a teacher pay raise into this? It seems arbitrary, but it's not.
Okay.
The state has billions of dollars that are locked up in these constitutional funds. Some that are absolutely needed. We need savings. We need a rainy day fund in case of emergencies, and we have those. But we have this one fund that was mostly populated by federal mineral revenues and also by some tobacco settlement money. And
it's just sitting there, right?
Right. It was just sitting there, and it was gaining some interest. It was definitely earning interest, but it was not earning interest at a high enough rate to constitute us leaving it there and not utilizing that money to pay down debt that we were paying a higher interest on.
Right.
So just in your own personal financial house, you would say, hey, look, if I'm not gaining interest on this, I might as well pay debt, because I'm paying a lot of interest on the debt. So there was this $2 billion fund, and the teacher retirement system is about $9 billion in debt. Now, that's a different debt. It's not like somebody swiped a credit card. It's an unaccrued liability, because as teachers retire, you do build up more debt in making sure that you can pay retirement moving forward. But it was about $9 billion in debt with its unaccrued liability. So we decided to take that $2 billion and pay down $2 billion of that $9 billion debt. And so we are reducing the unaccrued liability debt on the teacher retirement system, which will put TRSL in a much better financial situation moving forward. So it should make our teacher retirement more secure. But then also, when we pay down that debt for them, the locals save in interest payments and the state saves in interest payments. So it frees up money to give the teacher pay raise. Now, the reason we mandated it, and we've been talking about the fact that we mandated it, is because 2 years ago, we did a similar thing, and we paid down some UAL debt in the same manner, and we asked nicely for locals to facilitate a pay raise, and some did and some didn't. So the legislature wanted to be very, very clear that that is what we wanted them to utilize that money for, was a teacher pay raise. So that's why it's included in this amendment. It wasn't just thrown in like through the general fund. It was facilitated through that debt payment and through savings of that debt payment.
And that's been sticking point for at least one of our representatives up this way, who doesn't. Now this bill makes the $2,000 stipend that they've received the last couple of years. That's the permanent.
Right.
Raise,
so obviously the stipend had to be renewed every year. So we're trying to make that permanent. And when we make that permanent, I mean, not only does it make teachers feel more secure in what their salary is, but it also counts toward their retirement in the future. Yeah.
Well, I won't use any names, but this particular representative, I just was speaking with them the other night, and they said, that's not the way you give a raise. A raise needs to come through the MFP. And I'm like, what? It's still money that they're getting that they wouldn't necessarily get otherwise. So I'm not sure I get that distinction.
Yeah,
in their mind, they said they didn't consider that to be a real raise, and I'm not getting.
Well, I obviously I love all of my colleagues, and I don't know who it was, but I respectfully disagree because I'm really a big fan of empowering the locals to be able to give those raises. I don't like it that teachers feel like they constantly have to come to Baton Rouge to beg for raises. I want to be able to free up money on the local level for their local school boards to give the raises.
Sure. So the $2,000 would be guaranteed.
Yes.
And then the locals could give more if they want to on top of that.
Absolutely. The state can also pitch in more if it wants to. If we have enough money in the budget to be able to pitch in more, we can. Also for support staff, I don't want to forget them. They're really vital to the education process, and they also get that $1,000 raise as well.
Well, what are some of the other misconceptions that are floating around out there about Amendment 2 that you hear?
Yeah, so I've heard a lot about, that we're raiding funds and that, Jindal raided funds and now they're raiding funds again. It's just entirely not the case. I just explained what we're doing with that $2 billion debt payment that we had just sitting there because the state has billions in funds like that. So we're trying to make better financial decisions. We're not raiding funds to put them into the state general fund on recurring things. We're using it on one-time things like paying down debt. Another really important aspect, I think, of Amendment 2, so the state has two different rainy day funds. One is the budget stabilization, which is the true rainy day fund for emergencies. And then another one is the revenue stabilization account that was started in 2018. Trying to, I guess, make a long story short, because it gets a little bit nerdy and boring, but we're going to combine those two funds in Amendment 2. We want to leave, so we've been told by our credit rating agencies that we need to leave about 25% of our state general fund in a savings account, and that's $3 billion. So our state general fund is $12 billion. Okay. So $3 billion is going to be kept in that combined fund to make sure that the state is, fiscally responsible and obviously we want to go up on our credit ratings as much as possible. It saves us money in the long run. So we're going to leave $3 billion in there. There'll be a little bit of money left over from combining those after the $3 billion, and we're going to use that to help the locals phase out the inventory tax. Now, the inventory tax sometimes is very confusing. Yeah,
I'll say it is confusing.
Yeah, but look, the inventory tax has to be paid at the beginning of every year, kind of in the beginning of every year, based on the inventory that a business has. So you could have a net operating loss and still owe the inventory tax.
That's crazy.
For larger corporations that operate in multiple states, they'll take their inventory in Louisiana and move it over state lines for a few days to lessen their inventory tax. Smaller businesses can't do that. Maybe they don't have locations like that. And so it really disproportionately affects our small businesses. Obviously, car dealerships are really, really affected by that. RVs, things of that nature are heavily affected. And we'd really like to see that eliminated. So we're trying to help our locals do that because it is an ad valorem or property type tax that goes directly to the local governments.
And that really puts Louisiana businesses at a disadvantage. Like this right where we are is close to the Texas border. So that puts businesses here at a big disadvantage to maybe businesses 30 miles away.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, look, going back to the broader tax reform session, our corporate tax structure is really, really cumbersome. We've been told that multiple times. It's a huge deterrent to business investing in Louisiana and creating jobs here. And I know nobody likes to think about, business tax breaks and all that kind of stuff. People get really worked up about it. but businesses employ our people.
I was going
They
to say,
create jobs.
I've never been hired by anybody that didn't run a business.
So exactly. And so, look, I'm not trying to be overly fair to business and not fair to individuals. We want to be fair on both. And honestly, a lot of small businesses pay on the personal side, because if you file as an S corp or an LLC, you file under the personal income tax rates, not the corporate. But overall, we were trying to make our business climate better. I think we're the only state. I know at one point we were one of the only, but I believe we're the only state now that has corporate income, inventory, and franchise tax.
That's too much.
It's a very cumbersome structure.
Yeah.
So thankfully, we were able to eliminate the franchise tax. And again, kind of like inventory, very confusing a little bit to people. The franchise tax is another one of those things that even if you have an operating loss, you can still owe the franchise tax just on your capital investment here.
Yeah.
So we eliminated the franchise tax, which will be really huge for our businesses going forward. We lowered the corporate income tax, and we're trying to phase out the inventory. But obviously, not only did we do that, we lowered personal income tax as well to 3%, to a flat rate of 3%, raised the standard deduction so that those rate payers at 1.85 will be at 0, and then those that were at 3.5 will be at 3, those at 4.25 are at 3, and then obviously raising the standard deduction will help them save even more money.
Yeah, that all dates back to last fall, when the special
exactly.
session on taxes. Some of that stuff went immediately into statute and is already into effect.
Yep.
Right? And the other is in Amendment 2.
Yeah. Which brings me to the last point about Amendment 2.
Okay.
So the standard deduction for those 65 and over and for retirement income was in the Constitution. And so, like I said, in this session, we raised the standard deduction for everyone from $4,500 to $12,500. In Amendment 2, for those 65 and over, we doubled that again.
Wow.
So it went from $12,500 to $25,000. And then if you're retired, you have a $6,000 deduction on your retirement income. We doubled that to $12,000. So if you're 65 and over, or over 65 and retired, your first $37,000 is tax-free. Married, filing jointly, first $74,000 tax-free.
You haven't heard anybody complain about that, have you?
I have not. I have not heard complaints about that. But look, I do want to be very clear. I've always tried to be as transparent as I possibly can be as a legislator, and so I do understand there's confusion, there's concerns. Anytime that you're making a really big change like this, I think there's just a lot of rumors that can get started. So I don't begrudge anybody for it. I understand it. I've been going all over the state trying to do a lot of things like this to clear up some of the misconceptions. I know the governor is as well. But we really, look, my passion every single day that I've been there is I love this state. I grew up here, born in North Louisiana, raised in South Louisiana, love every single part of this state and aspect of it. And I'm just tired of it being last in everything. And I want to make it better, and I think Amendment 2 is really going to help us get there.
I mean, I was talking to Secretary Nelson, and he said he thinks this is the most significant change to the Constitution, to the tax codes that has gone on in at least more than 50 years, right?
Yep, absolutely. I totally agree.
So here's a big question. I know you probably don't want to think about this. What happens if this thing doesn't pass?
Yeah, look, I was speaking in Ruston this morning, and we kind of went through that as well. And I mean, look, at the end of the day, unfortunately, we kind of have to go back to the drawing board on some of these things. But, we still have the 3% flat rate income tax. We still went to 5.5% on the corporate side. Our highest rate on the corporate side was 7.5%, which was the highest in the Southeast. Huge sticker shock for people looking to invest here. So I'm happy to say that we are no longer the highest in the Southeast. So I think that's going to go a long way. Franchise tax still goes away. Unfortunately, we don't. The standard deduction for seniors is in the Constitution, and so that would not be a part of it. Unfortunately, we would not be able to make that debt payment to the teacher retirement fund. So we'd have to facilitate another way on the teacher pay raise. But
well, this passed by huge majorities in both chambers, right?
Yeah, bipartisan support.
Yeah. So if by chance Amendment 2 doesn't pass, would it be difficult, you think, to get all those things, these good things, put into statute in the next session? Or
I mean, again, it really just depends on what it is, because if the language is in the Constitution, then we have to do it by constitutional amendment.
Has to be that way, okay.
Unfortunately. And so, yeah, look, I mean, I will probably be a little bit sad, but really not even because I'm the author of it, because I truly believe in it. I truly am very passionate about what we're doing here. And so, I mean, we'll be a little sad for maybe a day, but then we'll pick back up and we'll keep trying. I mean, I never grow weary of trying to make Louisiana a better place. So
sure. Okay, we got like 5 minutes left here.
Okay.
So, is there anything else you want to say about Amendment 2, or I want to move on to the next session, but I'm happy to talk about Amendment 2 if you want to.
I could talk about it for days, but I think we mostly covered everything.
Well, we don't have days, but so we have another session coming up in the middle of April. April 14th, I think.
Yep, that's right.
So what should be...
One day before tax day.
Yeah, great. What should we be looking for this session? What is the emphasis going to be here? I know it's a fiscal session.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I've obviously had a lot of conversations with my colleagues. I think everybody kind of wants to see the dust settle on a lot of these changes. Most of them did not take effect until January, and so, we're trying to see the fiscal impact of those. Look, I can absolutely tell you 100% that both the governor and I want to see those both rates on the personal income tax side and the sales tax side go down. I don't know if we'll be able to get there in this session, but I do believe we'll be able to get there in the next couple of years to reduce some of those rates moving forward. Because I truly believe a lot of what we did is going to stimulate our economy and grow our economy, which will allow us to continuously lower those rates.
Sure.
Obviously, our biggest problem is we've been losing population in Louisiana.
Yeah.
We were the only state in the Southeast to lose population in the last census. So very concerning. And obviously, if you don't have that base there and you're not growing your population and your economy, then, your state does suffer. And so, I'm hoping that we will reverse that trend and we will bring more jobs and industry here.
Yeah.
And so, therefore, we will be able to continuously lower those rates. Our ultimate goal is zero income tax. You've seen our neighbors do it in Texas. You've seen Florida do it. You've seen Tennessee do it. We want to get there in Louisiana.
Oh, I think everybody would. I don't know anybody that likes paying income tax.
Yeah, I don't know either. So,
and the question you always hear is, if you're going to eliminate the income tax, how do you replace that revenue? Mm-hmm. What's the answer to that? Property taxes?
No, I mean, look, I will absolutely tell
Sales
you.
tax.
I will absolutely tell you right now that nobody wants to see property taxes increase by any means. That's why we left the homestead exemption in the Constitution. I think our goal, again, would be to grow the economy and get more people here and grow your taxpayer base, not necessarily trading it off or increasing any rates. We just have to stop the bleeding. We have to reverse the trend of people leaving. So, look, I think it's absolutely doable. I think also a big piece of this is, like I said, we made some better fiscal and financial decisions with some of those funds that we had locked up in the Constitution. Because the important part about the Revenue Stabilization Fund that I mentioned earlier, that we were combining with the other one, that fund was actually recurring revenue that was coming to the state, because it was the over collections of corporate income and franchise tax. Anything over $600 million was being deposited into that account. Okay. Over the last few years, we started depositing more and more and more every year. And again, that's recurring revenue, because that's annual corporate income tax payments. So by freeing that up and making like I said, a better financial decision by eliminating that one and depositing enough to keep in our healthy savings account, then that recurring revenue will go into the state general fund, and that will actually give us the ability to lower rates more.
Do you believe that all of these changes will stop the bleeding and people will come back to Louisiana then?
I'm very hopeful of that, Jeff. I mean, look, Louisiana it's a wonderful place. Sometimes we get in our own way, but it's a wonderful place to live. I mean, you mentioned to me kind of going back and forth between here and another state, and I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you keep coming back.
Well, I appreciate that.
So
it wasn't the plan, but things worked out, and I kind of like it in Louisiana.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I love coming down to Baton Rouge and talking to all y'all at the state capitol.
Yeah, I appreciate it. But look, I think in the regular session, you'll see a little bit of cleanup. Obviously, anytime you do any major reform, there's a couple unintended consequences here and there. So, you'll see some cleanup from the tax session. You'll probably see some cleanup language on the church property tax exemption, like I mentioned. But I think for the most part, we're going to kind of let the dust settle and see what type of boost we give to our economy.
All right, we're going to wrap this thing up here.
All right.
You got a final thought on Amendment 2?
Look, early voting is through Saturday, and March 29th is Election Day. I appreciate the questions, but like I said, and like Secretary Nelson said, I think this is some of the greatest fiscal reform we can do for our state, and looking forward to continuing in that effort and hopefully getting to zero income tax.
Thanks for talking to us.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
State Representative Julie Emerson, Chairwoman of the House Ways and Means Committee, and she would like you to vote yes on Amendment 2 on March 29th. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching another episode of The App, Arklatek's People and Politics, available wherever you get your podcasts and, of course, on all KTBS digital platforms. Have a good one, everybody.